All right, welcome to this week's special Rising Tide event, which is part of a broader event, actually, of two lectures that are. I've been waiting for this for a long time. Jerry's been waiting for this. Well, Jerry, I'm sure has gotten already sneak peeks galore, so he knows all the punchlines. I'm looking forward to this. For many months, Magdalena has been. I think it was probably 6 months ago or something. I remember maybe longer. Magdalena visited us here in Quebec and had this giant book on the Boer War, full of footnotes or post-its and was just dizzy with just massive information bubbling behind her eyeballs and new
Yeah.
discoveries. And obviously, this is one of the most important, underrated moments in universal history for all sorts of reasons. And I think anybody who's here probably has discovered to a varying level of degrees how important the Boer War was as part of a reorganization of systems of empire more generally that produced some very bad things, just terrible things that we have yet to properly diagnose and thus heal from here 120 years plus later. So I'm really happy that Magdalena, it was such a grandiose task that doing this in one sitting was not going to do justice to the idea. So we decided what we'll do: two classes. Tonight will be number one, and then we'll follow it up with part two on this coming Sunday at 2 p.m. usual time. I noticed that there's already a hand up, which usually is at the end. But Hassan, is it important this digital hand that has been raised, or?
It's a very quick thing, and whether it's answered now or part two or can be handled in questions, I don't know. I served for 14 years in the Canadian Army and did a lot of look at the Boer War as well as during my time, which was Bosnia and Afghanistan. We just repeat history. Canadians were in the Boer War doing exactly the same thing we were doing in Afghanistan. So I'm very interested to see how and where the Canadian experience is covered, because that was an eye-opener for me 20 years ago when it was kind of my time at it and looking at what were we doing in history and where did things rhyme or repeat. So I will leave my comment at that. And yeah, just looking forward to listening and learning. Thank you.
Sure, me too. All right, so I think Magdalena, that's probably a good place for you to jump in and enlighten us with your research.
So I just wanted to tell Hassan, I will peripherally touch on the Canadians being there. Peripherally, okay? So let me see. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. There we are. Okay. So I entitled my presentation. Oh, wait. Okay. I have to go back. Stop sharing. Okay. I wanted to, this is actually the book that set the whole thing off, okay, for me. I was reading this book by Anne Harris. It's called, it's a historical fiction, okay? So nothing heavy duty. But this was set me off doing actually the research. No Place for a Lady. And it was telling a lot about the Second Boer War. Then what happened is when I started doing research into this, because this was it actually shocked me to the core, because I had never heard of concentration camps in South Africa. So that was the first thing that set me off. I said, my goodness me, I have no idea about this. I need to investigate this. Okay. So then I started digging into this. Very soon I realized there's no way I can tell what's happening in the First Boer War or the Second Boer War without actually going further back to the history of South Africa. And that's when I decided, okay, so I got to start at the beginning, at the timeline. And that's where I'm starting now. And that's why it became a two-part series, because there's so much material to go through. So having said that, also I want to put a little bit disclaimer on it. I will use some of the terms that were used back then, and so don't be offended, okay? And yeah, okay. Okay. All right. So, Perfidious, my title is Perfidious, Albion, or the Not So Short History of South Africa. And if you want to learn about imperialism and how it's being done, this is the case study. South Africa was very important, okay, for international trade. You had shipping stopping at Cape Town, coming from Europe, from England, from France, from the Dutch, from Holland, going to East India. Batavia here, you see that was called the Dutch East Indies, okay? And they would stop at the Cape Town to load fresh water, vegetables, and so on. The East India trade was very important because of all the spices and so forth. So the Portuguese explorer Bartholomew Dias became the first European to reach the Cape of Good Hope, as it was called then. The Portuguese people, sailor, came to blows with the Khoi indigenous people. There was some battles. As a consequence, the Portuguese sailors were told not to land in the region, stay away from that region. And that put the Portuguese, at a disadvantage to the Dutch, the English, and the French, who would go there and replenish food and water. In 1580, Sir Francis Drake circumnavigates the Cape of Good Hope. And in 1647, you had a Dutch ship, the Nieuwe Haarlem, running aground at the Cape of Good Hope. And the Dutchmen, survived the shipwreck, stayed at the Cape for a year. And after they came back to the Netherlands, they wrote a report for the Dutch East India Company on the feasibility of using the Cape as a refreshment station for long. So, okay, Cape Town was founded by a Dutch merchant named Jan van Riebeck, okay? And he was an employee of the Dutch East India Company in 1652 near Table Bay. The Table Bay is named after Table Mountain, which looks exactly like a tabletop, very flat on the top. And the Cape remained under Dutch control from 1652 to 1795. So, okay, almost 150 years. This Dutch settlement was the first permanent European settlement in South Africa with a population of about 1800 by 1707. There are people there. Hold on, I'm admitting. Okay. So I wanted to give a little bit of an overview over the indigenous people of South Africa because there is no story. The story of South Africa cannot be told without mentioning indigenous people, okay? So you had the San, okay? You had the Khoi. The San were hunter-gatherers, okay? The Boers, the Boers used to fight with them, and the men were killed by the Boers, and the children and women became slaves or cheap labor sources to work on the farms. The Khoi, okay, called also Khois, were herders, and they lost a lot of grazing land because of the takeover of the Boers by the Boers, and they went to work as herders or servants on Boer farms. Then you have the Xhosas, okay? They're down here. I hope I say these names right. I'm not sure, okay? The Xhosas here, as you can see down here, between the pink British and on the right, the mountainous area, okay? These are Bantu ethnic groups. They had 9 wars between 1779 and 1879, over 100 years, 9 wars between the Xhosa kingdom and the British Empire, as well as the Trekkers. And then you had the Zulus, okay, over here on the East Coast. they established the Kingdom of Zululand, which was Shaka established that. He was a very famous leader. He had a standing army, and he consolidated a whole bunch of rival clans into his empire. And then there were other tribes like the Shoshangani, the Swangendaba, the Ndebele, the Hlubi, the Nagawane, the Pedis, and the Mafengu, just to name the most major ones. So the Boers are a group of South Africans who descended from the Dutch-speaking settlers that came there all the way in the beginning. And they first arrived in Africa in 1652, and they were not nice people either. They used enslaved people to farm the fertile soil. So the funny thing is, you have a tendency when you look at the Boers and the Brits, and you're trying to, okay, who is the good guy, who is the bad guy? Sorry, okay, there is a margin. My sympathies are more with the Boers, okay, but I recognize they are not so great either. And you have the Brits, okay? And so the Boers were staunch Calvinists, very God-fearing. They saw themselves as the children of God in the wilderness. They were Christian-elect, divinely ordained to rule the land and the backward natives therein. And they definitely thought that Black people were way below them. So some of the common terms, so Afrikaner are Southern African ethnic groups derived predominantly from Dutch settlers. So the Dutch, the Boers, were also called Afrikaner, okay? Burger was another term that's used, and Boer, okay? Again, being used as the white Dutch settlers, okay? Voortrekkers, another word for the Boers, members of the one group of Dutch-speaking people. They migrated away from the Cape Colony into the interior. They wanted to get away from the British rule. And of course, Africans, which is not the same as Afrikaner. Africans are people born in Africa, so the indigenous population. Coloreds, okay? Indigenous people or indentured servants, they called them coolies, okay? They were brought in from other British-controlled colonies like India and China and the Pacific. And then you have a term called Uitlanders, a foreigner or an outsider, okay? So that will be a British or another European immigrant living in the Transvaal. And Uitlanders were denied citizenship by the Boers for cultural and economic reasons. Okay. All right, so Van Riebeck introduced slavery in the Cape Colony, okay? So as I said in the beginning, no good and bad sides here, okay? In 1659, the first Khoi Dutch War breaks out because the Dutch are trying to take over their land. In 1673, the second Khoi Dutch War. Okay, now the Khoi are being called Hottentots, okay, which is a racial term. In 1685, the Cape Governor Simon van der Stel gives the settlers land, okay, which is not his to give because the land doesn't belong to the Dutch. I mean, this is indigenous land. And he kind of just handed it over to the settlers. Here, go and settle the land, okay? 1688, the first French Huguenots arrive in the Cape Colony. French Huguenots, the Huguenots were a Protestant religious group that were persecuted in France, and they left there to come to settle in the Cape Colony as well. So you have French and Dutch now there, okay? And a huge amount of indigenous people. 1779, you have the first of the Xhosa War breaks out between the Dutch and the Xhosa, okay? And this Dutch explorer, Robert Jacob Gordon, names the Orange River after the House of Orange-Nassau. Again, after the Orange River is named after the Dutch, House of Orange-Nassau. And in 1781, a French fleet prevents the British are now coming to try to take over the Cape Colony. And the French fleet prevents the British from doing that. So, now what's happening in Europe? In Europe, you have the French Revolutionary War. And of course, they are kind of instigated or motivated by the American Revolution. So during the French Revolutionary Wars, the French troops enter the Dutch Republic, Holland, and capture Amsterdam. And William of Orange fled to Britain. So then the Dutch Republic became the Batavian Republic. So Holland became the Batavian Republic. William of Orange in Britain issues the Q letters, and he's telling all his colonial governors to cooperate with British occupation forces. Secretary of State of War for War, Henry Dundas, Dundas Street here in Toronto is named after him, authorized a mission to ensure control of the Cape Colony. So he's sending British troops, and he wants to eliminate the potential threat to poses to the East India trade, so that they would have assurance for a location to load water and food and so on. So there's an invasion of British forces between June 10th and September 15th. There's a battle at the Battle of Mutzenberg, where the Dutch forces or the Dutch settlers are fighting against the Brits, and the British have a victory, The Dutch governor passed control of his colony to the British on September 15th, 1795. So now the British run the colony. 1799, the London Missionary Society sends missionaries to South Africa to convert the heathen. So the British occupation continued until the Peace of Amiens in 1802, when the Cape was returned to the Dutch. And in 1806, during the Napoleonic War, a second British invasion reoccupied the colony after the Battle of Blouberg. So from then on, the British are there to stay. In 1807, the slave trade to South Africa is abolished, but slavery remains legal in the Cape Colony. And then in 1809, you have a Hottentot proclamation issued. That was a decree issued by the governor of the Cape Colony, the Earl of Caledon, to legalize the enslavement of the Khoikhoi, what they called the Hottentot people. And these slaves, they were supposed to assist the Dutch landowners with free labor, and of course also the British landowner with free labor. And this was supposed to also control the mobility of the Khoikhoi laborers. And that proclamation was then repealed in 1828. And in 1811, the fourth of the 9 Xhosa Wars breaks out. So, did I just skip a slide here? So the Anglo-Dutch Treaty took place in 1814, after the Napoleonic War. So it was signed by the United Kingdom and Ireland, of Great Britain and Ireland, and the United Netherlands in London in 1814. And what happened there is that the treaty, this Anglo-Dutch Treaty, returned all the colonial possessions of the Dutch as they were at January 1st, 1803. So before the outbreak of the Napoleonic Wars in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. So all the Dutch possessions were supposed to be returned. So most of the territories in the Moluccas and Java that Britain had seized in the Napoleonic Wars went back to the Netherlands. However, okay, it was the Cape Colony became a confirmed British possession, as well as a portion of of Dutch Guiana in South America. Okay, so this was signed by Viscount Castlereagh on behalf of the British and Mr. Farquhar on behalf of the Dutch. So now it's confirmed. Okay, Cape Colony, Cape Town is British possession. But the Boer and the British, they didn't see eye to eye at all. Okay, so in 1815 there was a very rebellion by the Boers against the British government, a Slachter's Neck, okay, because the Boers, they believed that the British colonial authority was hostile towards themselves, and that they favored the blacks and the coloreds above the Afrikaner farmers. And so there was a big rebellion, okay. They're defeated. The leaders are being tried in the Uitenhage court, okay, and 5 of the leaders were sentenced to death. And the remaining rebels were acquitted or banished by the Brits, okay. Of course, this created a huge hostility, bad sentiment between the Boers and the British. A year later, the Zulu king Shaka founds the Zulu kingdom. Very smart leader, very famous, okay? And then in 1818, the 5th of the Xhosa Wars break out. So all these wars with the indigenous people is over land being taken from them, and people being put in, caught and put in slavery. So after the Napoleonic War, there was a very big unemployment issue in Britain. So the solution of the British government was to encourage the people, the citizens, to immigrate to the Cape to find work there. So thousands of British, there were about 4,000 new British immigrants that settled in the Eastern Cape. And they were granted farming land to settle on. Okay. And but most of these farms were completely unsuccessful because the immigrants were artisans. They didn't know agricultural. And so many of them moved back to established towns like Port Elizabeth and Grahamstown and East London. Okay. So this is a big problem now. Okay. And at the same time, in 22, the Dutch language was abolished in the civil service and court of the colony, Cape Colony. Now, a lot of the Boers did not speak English. They spoke Dutch. And so this was definitely also being, again, looked at as a slight, okay, towards them. In 1834, the abolition of slavery in the Cape Colony is announced, okay? Although this is not really abolition of slavery. What happened, okay, is that the slaves are being bought by the British government, not just set free. They're not set free. They're being bought by the British government, okay? So the slave owners are compensated if they can travel to Britain for their reimbursement for the slaves, which very few people were able to do. So there, again, more resentment. And then at the same year, the 6th of the Xhosa Wars break out, okay? So in 1835, you had the Great Trek begins. Now this is where the Boers got together, okay? They basically said, we have had it. We don't want to have anything to do with those Brits, okay? We're going to get away from them. We're going to go migrate northwards, okay? with wagons, similar to what the Americans did, going west, okay? So we're going to go north, okay, by wagon into the interior of South Africa, of modern South Africa, okay? We want to live beyond the Cape's British colonial administration. So this shows you some of these treks. As you can see from the colors, there are a number of different trek leaders. So there's Louis Tregart's, okay? There's Hendrik Potgieter's trek, Piet Retief's trek. He's quite famous, okay? And so forth. In many of these cases, they had battles with the indigenous people because they're taking over their land, okay? And in some cases, they got killed, okay, and got lost and had to return, or the entire trek was killed. But that was the, this is how the Boers ended up, okay, in the interior of South Africa. So as you can see on the bottom, there's the pink color, is the British, the Cape Colony, the British Empire controls that area. And where you can see the stripes down here, that's the Xhosa, okay, which continuously having battles with the Brits over their territory. So the Boers are settling, okay, in this interior area here. You can see, just for future reference, if there was, okay, as I said earlier, that the Boers were very God-fearing. In their homes, they would have an organ, okay? There were Bible readings every night, okay? The women were very much involved in defense of the Boers themselves. So, for example, they were trained, and this becomes important later on. They were trained to help with defending by loading the rifles. So everybody had a rifle. Every family member had a rifle in the Boer family, and then they were trained shooting and so forth. And the women were loading the rifles, and the men would shoot them, give them back an empty gun, and they would load it and hand them back a loaded gun. So as you can see here on the left. So some of the reasons for the Great Trek, okay, as I mentioned before, I just want to make sure that this is understood. Okay, so you had immense tension between the Boer family, the Boers, and the British. Under the British rule, okay, the colony underwent major administrative changes. So, for example, the British insisted that the Cape finance its own affairs through self-taxation. The Boers were not familiar with paying taxes at all, okay? That was completely alien to them. So the language of administration became English, which few of the Boers spoke, okay? In 1815, a Boer was arrested for assaulting one of his servants, okay? And he was taken to court. At that point, many Boers rose up in rebellion, and then 5 of them were being hanged for insurrection. And the British were talking about designating non-white servants as citizens, which was a big no-no for the Boers. Then, of course, in 1834, you had the legislation was passed that all slaves were supposed to be freed. That was actually not the case. Instead, they were put into so-called apprenticeships, okay? So to train the slaves to be free workers, and this apprenticeship was for 4 years. So for 4 years, the slaves that used to be slaves are now not called slaves anymore, but called apprentices, and they're still treated the exact same way. Okay. In order for compensation to be received, you had to go to Britain to receive the compensation, which was impossible. So that's why the Boers, they had enough of British rule. They decided to leave the Cape Colony. They were looking for self-governance. and new land to farm. So many battles took place between the Voortrekkers and the Black tribes during the Great Treks. Okay, you had the Ndebele, okay, and the Zulu tribes. The Zulu king Dingane, that's before Shaka, okay, had Pierre RTF and his men all killed. Other Voortrekkers are also killed by the Zulus. The Voortrekker, that's now the name for the Boers, because they are trekking, okay, into the inside of the country. They recovered from those setbacks. There was a very famous battle between the Voortrekkers and the Zulu on December 16, 1838. This became known as the Battle of Blood River. More than 3,000 Zulu warriors were killed. And the Voortrekkers eventually defeated the Ndebele and the Zulus. December 16th is now called the Day of Reconciliation in South Africa. So the end result of the Great Trek was that it led directly to the founding of several autonomous Boer republics, namely the South African Republic, which is also known as the Transvaal, the Orange Free State, and the Natalia Republic. So three, okay, republics, Boer republics at that point, okay? This also led to, these conflicts also resulted in the displacement of the Northern Ndebele people, and of course the conflicts with the Zulu people, which finally, at the end, caused the collapse of the Zulu kingdom. So this is a very, I kind of had to, it's almost like the land grabs in Canada, where you had land commonly owned by natives, okay? However, natives in Canada don't own land. They consider land to be a common resource for all to use. And when the British came and the French, okay, basically the idea was, oh, you take over, okay, this is my land now, I'll take it. So very similar. 1842, the United Kingdom conquers the Boer Republic of Natalia, okay? And so many Voortrekkers leave at that point because they don't want to fight again. And so they leave and they join the other republics. The Republic of Natalia is important for the Brits because it's on the water, it's on the coast. So the Republic of Natalia is renamed the British Natal Colony. The Xhosa, are right there on the west side of Natalia, or Natal Colony. The 7th Xhosa War breaks out. 4 years later, the 8th of the Xhosa War breaks out. It's a period of tremendous unrest and fighting going on all the time. In 1852, the United Kingdom recognizes the independence of the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek, or the South African Republic, also known as the Transvaal. And in 1854, the United Kingdom also recognizes the independence of the Orange Free State at the Orange River Convention. Now, one might add, okay, if the diamonds would have been found before 1852, I do not think that the United Kingdom would have recognized the independence of the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. But the diamonds have not been found yet. So 1856, 1857, the first railway line opens in Durban, linking the harbor to the center of the town of Durban. It's very short, but it's the beginning of railroads. So, okay. In 1860, okay, you had the first indentured laborers are transported. There's a shortage of labor in South Africa. Indian indentured laborers are transported from Madras to Durban, okay? This was immigration to Natal was approved in August 1860, and the first ship from Madras arrived in November, okay? And this became the basis of the Indian South African community. The recruits were employed on 3-year contracts, okay? They were supposed to work in sugarcane, wine production. The French Huguenots were involved with the wine production, okay? Merino sheep, holding agriculture. So this became a standard practice of Great Britain to bring in labor from other colonial holdings, okay? So on the bottom here I wrote between 1842 and 1870, a total of 500,000 plus Indians emigrated to the British and French colonies. Some of them, majority went to Mauritius, Demerara, okay, Trinidad, okay, Jamaica. 6,500 went to Natal, okay, Réunion, okay, and other French colonies. What struck me when I looked at this picture and I thought, goodness me, are these prisoners? No, they're not prisoners. This is supposed to be the identification photos taken of Indian laborers going to becoming indentured laborers. They all had their identification numbers. Very humiliating pictures. Eureka, okay? So in 1866, the Eureka diamond is found in Griqualand West. Okay, so you have here, okay, the South African Republic, okay, Boer, that's a Boer Republic. You have the Orange Free State Republic, Natalia Republic, okay, Republic of Natal, okay. And then you have Griqualand West and Griqualand East here. The diamonds was found in Griqualand West, okay? Right on the border of Orange Free State. So the mining starts. Now we have diamonds in South Africa. And that news spreads very quickly, okay? And of course, right away, Griqualand West is annexed by the United Kingdom, okay? They're founding a town called Nurash. Later it's called Kimberley, okay? And then the diamond fields are claimed by the Griqua, okay? Everybody wants to say claim the diamond fields. The Griqua want them, the Orange Free State want them, the South African Republic want them, the Cape Colony want them, okay? And so there's a fight over this area where the diamonds are, and apparently the governor of the colony of Natal made the decision, or was assigned to decide, okay, who's going to end up with it. And since he's a Brit, he assigns them to Griqua land, and of course Griqua is annexed by the United Kingdom. So okay, it's now becoming British, okay, British territory. As a result, Martilius Wessel Pretorius resigns as state president of the South African Republic. He is not happy about this. Now, who comes into the picture? Same year, okay, 18-year-old Cecil Rhodes leaves for Kimberley from his brother's farm in Natal. Here he is, Cecil John Rhodes, okay, born in England, okay, became very, very famous. Everybody knows his name, Cecil Rhodes, okay. Olive Schreiner, a South African author who was initially awed by Rhodes, had come to really detest him. And in April of 1897, many years later than we are right now in our timeline, she wrote in a letter to her friend, okay, "We fight Rhodes because he means so much of oppression injustice, and moral degradation to South Africa. But if he passed away tomorrow, there still remains the terrible fact that something in our society has formed the matrix which has fed, nourished, built up such a man. And the question, of course, is what is it? What causes people like Cecil Rhodes to come about? Okay, he was born 1853 in a small hamlet in England. His father was a vicar, okay? Which reminds me of Marty's comment the other day where he was talking about children of vicars and psychologists always end up strange. I'm paraphrasing, okay? Okay, so Rhodes had 9 brothers and 2 sisters. He was the 5th son. He was a sickly kid. Okay, so it was decided that he should visit his brother, who had recently immigrated to Natal, South Africa, and he should recuperate there. So then the idea was that business opportunities in South Africa would be promising a better future than staying in England. So he arrived in Durban on September 1st, 1817. He brought with him 3,000 pounds that his aunt had lent him, and he used it to invest in the diamond diggings in Kimberley. At 18, he went to the diamond fields of Kimberley. Among his earliest associates in those days was John X. Merriman and Charles D. Rudd, of whom we will learn about later, okay? And they became his partner in the De Beers Mining Company and the British South Africa Company. So this is a picture, okay? So by 1881, he had bought up sufficient claims to be one of the largest diamond producers in South Africa. He won election to the Cape Legislative Assembly, and he completed a degree at Oriel College in Oxford over an 8-year period. He went back and forth between South Africa and Great Britain. This is a statue of Cecil Rhodes at Oxford, okay? When he died, he left his considerable fortune to Oxford, and they built this big building for him and the statue on him, with him. And then what happened is in recent years, of course, because of all the bad publicity of Cecil Rhodes, there was a big to-do in Oxford about taking the statue down, okay? Which they did not do. They actually told one of the professors at Oxford that he had to do a defense of Cecil Rhodes. And you actually can find it on the internet, defense of Cecil Rhodes, and okay, why we should be proud of him, okay? So, but now, because of all the controversy, they have a plaque at the bottom of the building where the statue is. So it says that this building was constructed by Oriel College in 1909 till 11, with money left in the will of Cecil Rhodes, a former student of the college. The college commissioned a series of statues to front the building, which includes Rhodes at the top, of course at the top. Rhodes, a committed British colonialist, obtained his fortune through exploitation of minerals, land, and peoples of southern Africa. Some of his activities led to great loss of life and attracted criticism in his day and ever since. In recent years, the statue has become a focus for public debate on racism and the legacy of colonialism. In June 2020, Oriel College declared its wish to remove the statue, but is not doing so following legal and regulatory advice. So how did, as Olive Schreiner said, how did Cecil Rhodes come about? Well, he had a teacher at Oxford. His name is Professor John Ruskin, John Ruskin was a huge influence on Cecil Rhodes and many of the Oxford students. He preached a revised doctrine of imperialism in the later half of the 19th century. And Ruskin had actually refined himself by visiting Venice, Italy, where he visited the salons of the old aristocratic families in Venice. And he studied how the tiny city-state dominated much of the world for over half a millennium. So that's where John Ruskin got his ideas from. And in his inaugural lecture at Oxford in 1870, Ruskin gave a vision of an expanded Britain circling the globe. Jerry, would you be kind enough and read this so I can have a drink of water?
Yes.
Thanks.
Ruskin's inaugural lecture at Oxford University. A destiny is now possible to us, the highest ever set before a nation to be accepted or refused. Will you, use of England, make your country again a royal throne of kings, a sceptered isle, for all the world a source of light, a center of peace? This is what England must do or perish. She must found colonies as fast, as far as she is able, formed of the most energetic and worthiest of men, seizing any piece of fruitful waste ground she can set her foot on, and then teaching her colonists that their chief virtue is to be fidelity to their country, and that their first aim is to advance the power of England by land and sea.
Thank you. So John Ruskin cloaked his imperialistic preachings in a mantle of social concern. That became a hallmark of Fabian socialism. Okay, he was devoted to the power of England over all others. And he preached the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race. And he had a hatred of the achievements and methods of the Italian Renaissance. Carroll Quigley, the historian, says in his Tragedy and Hope, he says, the new imperialism after 1870 was quite different in tone from that which the Little Englanders, meaning United States, okay, had opposed earlier. The chief changes were that it was justified on grounds of moral duty and of social reform, and not as earlier on grounds of missionary activity and material advantage. The man most responsible for this change was John Ruskin. So, okay, here's Cecil Rhodes, okay, in the famous cartoon. So undergraduate Cecil Rhodes, he copied out Ruskin's inaugural address in longhand and kept it with him for the next 30 years, I guess close to his heart, okay? So he was deeply moved by John Ruskin's inaugural address and his discussions with him. Among his other Oxford associates were Rochford Maguire, who's later a fellow of All Souls and the director of the British South Africa Company, which we will hear about later too, and Charles Metcalfe, okay? And on February 5th, 1891, a little bit further down the road, Rhodes and other influential figures in Britain formed a secret society, the Round Table, which Rhodes had been planning for 16 years to carry out Ruskin's ideas. So he wrote of this society. Why should we not form a secret society with but one object, the furtherance of the British Empire and the bringing of the whole uncivilized world under British rule, for the recovery of the United States, for the making the Anglo-Saxon race but one empire? So, okay, later out of this round table spawned organizations like the New York Council of Foreign Relations, the British Royal Institute of International Affairs, which is also called Chatham House, and a dozen of other one-worldist institutions. He also said, okay, wherever you turn your eye, except in science, an Oxford man is at the top of the tree. So Rhodes also increasingly conceived of territorial segregation. He said, okay, my idea is that the natives should be kept in these native reserves and not be mixed with the white men at all. Are you going to sanction the idea, with all the difficulties of the poor whites before us, that my children grow up in the middle of native locations? Later on, many years later, Kekovich, who was commanding the British forces in Kimberley during the siege of the Second Boer War, he found out that there was an increasing rate of scurvy and death among the black workers. And so he found out that they were not being paid and not being given adequate food. So Kekovich raised this matter with Rhodes, and Rhodes told them, do not meddle in his affair. And he added that if the Africans would not leave the town, they must be forced to, and giving them only bread and salt had this effect. Yet during the siege, okay, whites, British, okay, were never short of provisions. But the blacks were deliberately starved. And here is Cecil Rhodes' dream. One of Rhodes' greatest dreams was a ribbon of red demarcating British territory, which would cross the whole of Africa from South Africa to Egypt. And part of this vision was his desire to construct a Cape to Cairo railroad, one of his most famous projects. And it was this expansive view, a vision of British imperial control, and the great lengths that Rhodes went to in order to fulfill his vision, which led many of his contemporaries and his biographers to mark him as a great visionary and a great leader based on that. So that's his dream. Okay, Cecil Rhodes, okay. I contend that we are the first race in the world, and that the more of the world we inhabit, the better it is for the human race. Just fancy those parts that are at present inhabited by the most despicable specimen of human being. What an alteration there would be in them if they were brought under Anglo-Saxon influence. If there be a God, I think that what he would like me to do is paint as much of the map of Africa British red as possible. So, okay. I am putting a lot of emphasis on Cecil Rhodes because he played a crucial role in the history of South Africa. Okay. He became the wealthiest British businessman in South Africa. He was a member of parliament till his death, okay, in the Cape Colony. He was prime minister of the Cape Colony, arch imperialist, okay. He acquired a British royal charter. He formed the British South Africa Company that colonized Zimbabwe. All Cecil Rhodes. So let's continue with our timeline, okay? In 1872, there was an introduction of pass laws to control the labor force in the Kimberley diamond mines. So this was a means, the pass laws created a means to control the workers' mobility and enforcing contracts. So they were first introduced in the colony in 1797 by Earl Macartney, okay? He was governor of the Cape Colony. He did them to try to prevent Africans from entering the Cape Colony. He is also the guy who said this. He said this famous thing about the sun never setting on the British Empire. So the pass laws existed elsewhere as well, okay? But this became a really, really big ways to control the workers, the Black workers especially. 1872-73, Rhodes and Charles Donnell Rudd became friends and partners. They worked the diamond claims in Kimberley. They dealt with diamonds and operating pumping and ice making machinery, among other odds and end businesses, okay? Small scale gold prospecting and mining began in this area in the early 1850s, but the first mother lode of gold was not discovered until 1885. In 1873, Pilgrim's Rest, which is the name of a town, becomes the second of the Transvaal gold fields, attracting a rush of prospectors. And then there's another area of digging about 5 kilometers away, the Makmak diggings. And this gold rush, it's actually alluvial gold panning, okay? And then gradually it gave way to deeper ore mining. Alluvial panning is basically looking for gold flakes in streams, in waters, and so forth, okay? So we have now gold, we have diamonds, we have gold. What happens? 1877, Britain annexes South African Republic and renamed it the Transvaal, okay? And the first Anglo-Boer War erupts. I mean, you kind of saw it coming. You had diamonds, you had gold, and now the Brits want it. So in 1874 and 75, okay, the diamond fields were in the grip of depression. Rhodes and Rudd, they stayed and they consolidated their interest. So there were some technical problems of clearing out the water that was flooding the mines. This became serious. Rhodes and Rudd, they got the contract for pumping the water out of the 3 main mines, okay? And then while Rhodes went to England to go to Oxford between 1873 and 1881, Rudd was managing their interests in South Africa. And while he was at Oxford, Rhodes continued to prosper in Kimberley. In 1880, Cecil Rhodes established the Mears Mining Company with Charles Donnell Rudd. And because what happened is that there were laws, a change of laws in Kimberley, which was, they were designed to force the small man, the independent, the individual diamond miner out of the diamond fields, okay? And these laws will only leave larger companies that were able to operate in the mines. So what Cecil Rhodes did together with his partner Charles Rudd, he consolidated a number of these mines, okay? There was an area called the New Rush, okay, Kimberley minefields. He decided that he wanted to move away from that area to higher ground. Rush had convinced him that further on there was actually going to be more diamonds, okay? And so he shoveled things around there, okay? So what Rhodes and Rudd did, they bought, okay, what was then known as the old De Beers farm. It was named after Johannes Nicolaas de Beer and his brother Dietrich Arnoldus de Beer, okay? These were the original farmers, the original owners of the farm, okay? And this farm would then finally give the name to Rhodes and Rudd's growing diamond company, De Beers, based on a Boer farmer's farm. Okay. So in 1880, okay, Cecil Rhodes prepares to enter public life at the Cape, okay? When Griqualand West is incorporated into the Cape Colony in 1877, so there were 6 seats in the Cape House of Assembly allocated for Griqualand West. So Rhodes chose one of the areas there, Berkeley West, as his constituency. And the interesting thing is that the Boer voters, they predominated. Remember, it is only the Boers, okay, and British people, men, okay, who could vote. Black people were not allowed to vote. Uitlanders, foreigners were not allowed to vote. So for some reason, okay, Rhodes is elected as a member of the Cape House of Assembly. He's 29 years old, okay, and he stayed in that seat till his death, okay. At that point, the chief preoccupation of the Cape Parliament was the future of Basutoland. Basutoland is today called Lesotho, okay, and they had a rebellion there in Lesotho, in Basutoland in 1880. And the Prime Minister of the Cape Colony, Sir Gordon Sprigg, okay? By the way, this is the predecessor of Cecil Rhodes being Prime Minister. And interestingly enough, Sir Gordon Sprigg will become Prime Minister again after Cecil Rhodes. Okay, so he did try to restore order. And they actually had precipitated a revolt by the people of Basutoland. And they had already applied a policy of disarmament. So when there was a rebellion, it was easy going because there was no weapons. So Cecil Rhodes was looking for expansion to the north, and to create his big dream of the Cape to Cairo Railroad. And he persuaded Britain to, and now he's a member of Parliament of the Assembly, okay? So he persuaded Britain to establish a protectorate over Bechuanaland, which is now called Botswana, in 1884. And eventually Britain annexed this territory as well. So, okay, the tension is building between British colonizers and Boers from the Transvaal Republic, okay? There were several causes of the First Anglo-Boer War: the expansion of the British Empire, the problems within the Transvaal government itself, British annexation of the Transvaal, okay? The Boer opposition to British rule in the Transvaal, okay? At this point, the Earl of Carnarvon, okay, was the British Secretary of State for the colonies under Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, and their mandate was very clear: expand the British Empire. And Lord Carnarvon wanted a confederation of all the British colonies, independent Boer republics and independent African groups in South Africa under British control. So, but by 1876, he realized that this was not going to be achieved peacefully. He told Disraeli, okay, by acting at once, we may acquire the whole Transvaal Republic, after which the Orange Free State will follow. So the lead up to the First Anglo-Boer War, okay. T.F. Burgers, I think, okay, I don't remember the first name now. Okay, was president of the Transvaal Republic from 1872 till annexation in 1877. And his republic had serious financial troubles. They had a war between the Boers and the Petty, okay? So that was draining finances. And the Boer people did not pay their taxes, okay? They were very, very independent-minded, I guess I would call it, okay? So yeah, okay. Lord Carnarvon sent Sir Theophilus Shepstone, he's the former Secretary for Native Affairs in Natal, to Transvaal as a special commissioner. He had 25 people with him as a support, okay? And what they did is very reminiscent of Iraq War propaganda, okay? They used propaganda to convince the world that Transvaal needed the protection of the British, okay? They kept saying, you know, Transvaal is a failed state. They can't even exercise fundamental responsibilities of any state. They can't control their territory. They can't control their population, okay? You know, it's not working. It's failed, okay? And there were rumors spread by the British officials and the media, British media, of a possible Zulu invasion of the Transvaal, which was not happening, okay? And the Transvaal Boers were accused of cruelty towards their natives, of proliferating slavery and the slave trade and exploiting Africans. All of the things of the British were guilty of as well, okay? And so this propaganda, that was the first section of the propaganda. And there was a second pillar, okay? They created a narration according to which the white British and the Boer population in Transvaal was eager to accept the annexation of the Transvaal by the British Empire. They wanted to be part of the British Empire. T.F. Burgers, the president of the Transvaal, did very little to stop the Britain from taking over the Transvaal. So Shepstone was there with his 25 men as a support, okay? For a long time, he hemmed and hawed and never really came out with his objective of annexing the Transvaal. Finally, he came out of it, and on April 12, 1877, a proclamation of annexation was read out by the British in Church Square in Pretoria, the capital of the Transvaal Republic. There was no resistance, and the Union Jack replaced the Vierkleur. That's the flag of Transvaal. So, okay. The Volksraad, which is the parliament, yes, parliament in Transvaal, decided in May 1877 to send a delegation to England to tell, okay, Britain that the residents of the Transvaal Republic did not agree with annexation. They sent Paul Kruger and E.J. Jorison as their delegation. Paul Kruger had not been elected by that point. So he was just a prominent citizen. And they went to Britain, okay, their mission failed. In 1878, a year later, Kruger and Jorison took a petition with more than 6,500 signatures from the Boers to London, okay, again, to convince them, to convey to them that the Transvaal people did not agree with annexation, but the British government insisted that the Transvaal remain a British possession. Now, Sir Theophilus Shepstone was now the administrator of the Transvaal colony. And he was very, very slow to initiate the promised self-government. And the colony was nearly bankrupt, okay? They had plans to build a railroad to Delagoa Bay, which is on the East Coast, okay? That had to be put on hold. Nothing was happening. Sir Shepstone became very unpopular with the colonial office in London, okay? And then he was replaced by Sir Owen Lyon in 1879. And then in September 1879, Sir Garnet Wolseley, okay, was appointed High Commissioner of Southeast Africa and Governor of Natal and Transvaal. And we'll hear about him later on as well. In January 1878, you had a large group of Boers gathering in Pretoria. They're protesting against the annexation, okay? They don't want to be. They walked. They did the great trek to get away from the British, and now they're being annexed by the British. They had hopes, okay? The election of the Liberal Party in Britain in April 1880 would mean independence for the Transvaal. But the new Prime Minister, Gladstone, insisted on maintaining British control in Pretoria. I mean, they weren't going to voluntarily give up the gold fields and the diamonds. So in October 1880, a newspaper wrote, "Passive resistance is now becoming futile." And in November 11, 1880, you had the first open conflict between the British and the Boer. What happened? You had a Boer farmer, okay? He refused to pay extra taxes or extra fees on his wagon. And the British forces confiscated his wagon. And on November 11th, okay, a commando of 100 Boer men took the wagon back from the British bailiff, okay, and returned it to the farmer. So that was the first open revolt. In December, 1 month later, not even a month later, between 8,000 and 10,000 Boers gathered in Pretoria, and Paul Kruger and Pierre Joubert and M.W. Pretorius were appointed as leaders of the Boers, okay? And on December 13th, 1880, these leaders proclaimed restoration of the Transvaal Republic. They raised their Vierkleur flag at Heidelberg. They rejected British authority, and this started the war and ended passive resistance. The first shots were fired at Potchefstroom. The Boers had 7,000 soldiers, okay, citizen soldiers, really, okay. British had 1,800 soldiers scattered in towns across the Transvaal. So Boers had many more than the Brits, okay. And there were 4 main battles fought, okay. Bronkhortsprut, Langsneck, Schuinshoekte, and Majuba. Majuba will come up again, okay? And there were sieges at a number of cities. So the Brits had completely underestimated their opponents. The Boers knew their local terrain. They were skilled with firearms. They wore civilian clothing, which created good enemy cover, okay? They were good riders. They knew where everything was, okay? British soldiers, they were still trained in this regular, okay, formations that the British had always fought with, okay, with the red uniforms that made them very easy targets. Now, somebody wrote somewhere, I read this, that the Boer War actually, for the first time, changed the way wars were fought. So from conventional wars with columns and troops and all these different ways of fighting wars that they did in the past, now guerrilla wars became a standard operation. Okay. So in February 26, 1881, Major General Sir George Pomeroy Coley decided to march on Majuba with 544 men, where the Boers had an outpost. The General P. Joubert and the Boers took up position at Laing's Neck to check on British reinforcements. Coley's men, the British men, reached the top of the mountain in the early morning. They were very tired. They tried to get their cannons up there. They tried to get their heavy artillery up there. They couldn't get them up the steep slope. They worked all night. They got up there, okay, very exhausted. Joubert ordered his men, okay, to climb the steep hill, take cover, and shoot at the British soldiers. Since the Brits were untrained in guerrilla warfare, the exposed British soldiers were easy marks. Coley was killed, okay, and the Boers were almost at the summit, and the British fled. So famous battle. The British had over 200 casualties killed and wounded. The Boers lost 1 man killed and another who died later of his wounds. And the British were completely humiliated at Majuba, okay? And this brought the end of the First Anglo-Boer War and introduced a very short-lived peace, okay? And as a consequence, the Gladstone government abandoned their previous federation policy. There was they signed at the Pretoria Convention, okay, there was a document signed. The Transvaal was granted complete self-government subject to the, drumroll, suzerainty of Her Majesty Queen Victoria. So many of the British still continue to regard the Boers as inferior adversaries. They vowed retribution. Remember Majuba became a rallying cry of the British during the Second Anglo-Boer War in 1899 to 1902. So suzerainty includes the rights, okay, and obligations of a person, state, or other polity which controls the foreign policy and relations of tributary states, but allows the tributary state internal autonomy, while the subordinate party is called a vassal state or tributary state. The dominant party is called a suzerain. The rights and obligations of a vassal are called vassalage, and the rights and obligations of a suzerain are called suzerainty. And this is very much like Canada. So in the aftermath, okay, so this is so after at this convention, okay, when they, even though the Boers had won the war, the Pretoria Convention, that was the document that was signed, said that Transvaal was granted complete self-government, subject to the suzerainty of Her Majesty Queen Victoria. So, okay, the South African Republic regained its independence. The Pretoria Convention laid down the terms of the peace agreement. The new republic was named the Transvaal, an independent republic. Okay. However, now we're getting to, okay, the critical things. Foreign relations and policies regarding Black people were to be approved by the British government. There was no expansion by the Boers allowed towards the West. And this meant that the Transvaal was still under British suzerainty or influence. In 1881, the Kimberley Royal Stock Exchange opens on February 2nd, 81. And okay, in 1882, for the first time in 10 years, an election is held and Paul Kruger wins in Transvaal. He becomes the head of Transvaal. In 1882, okay, and this also shows you a little bit about the attitudes regarding development. Kimberley becomes the first city in the Southern Hemisphere and the second in the world to integrate electric streetlights into its infrastructure. So the conditions of the Pretoria Conventions were unacceptable for the Transvaalers, and at the end of 1883, a delegation, including Paul Kruger, the new president of Transvaal, left for London to review the agreement and to hopefully change it. So the purpose of the trip to London and also to the European mainland. In London, they wanted to negotiate the amendments to the Pretoria Convention. In Europe, on the mainland, Kruger recognized the need for a national bank to reorganize the government's finances. And he wanted this bank to be under Transvaal control, not under British control. Also, they needed a rail link to the sea, also under Transvaal control. and he's looking for finances for that. And he also needed a new state attorney. So here are the railroads in 1882. And you can see, okay, the railroads go from the Cape Colony inwards. And then by 1895, okay, 13 years later, you see railroads being built, okay, going through the Orange Free State into the Transvaal Republic, okay. And you can see the red line here. She's skirting, okay, the Orange Free State and skirting, okay, the Transvaal Republic. But goes through Kimberley. Kimberley is right here. So, but you can see the expansion in 13 short years of the railroads here. So, you had the London Convention of 1884. This is the South African Republic delegation. You have Paul Kruger here seated with his beard, okay? You have General Nicholas Smith. You had the Reverend Stephanius Jacobus du Toit, okay? You had others, a legal advisor. You had secretary, so a 5-man delegation. On the British side, you had Edward Henry Stanley, the first 15th Earl of Derby, okay? Also known as Lord Stanley, okay? So he was Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs twice also Colonial Secretary. He served as Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs under his father, okay? So his father was Lord Stanley, the 3-time Prime Minister of England. So you can see that this is a very high delegation here on the British side that is dealing with the 5 men from South Africa. By the way, you know, for the Canadians who are listening in the audience, the NHL Stanley Club is named after Frederick Arthur Stanley. He is the brother of this fellow here. Just thought I'd throw that in. So at the conclusion of the London Convention is what happened is the name of the South African Republic. That's the Pretoria Convention. The Pretoria Convention is the one that happens in South Africa, okay? So the name had been changed to Transvaal Territory, okay? But at the request, okay, now in England, in London, at the request of the Transvaal Territories Volksraad, the name was restored to the South African Republic. And the suzerainty article was amended, not eradicated, not getting rid of, no, amended, okay? South African Republic had the right to enter into a treaty with the Orange Free State without approval from the British. Any other treaty with any other nations would require approval from the British, provided it not take longer than 6 months to advise the South African Republic of such an approval or rejection. So, okay. Then, okay, Kruger went to, the delegation went to the Netherlands, and there was an absolute enthusiastic welcome for the winners of the First Boer War. The delegation met with King William II and Queen Emma, okay. You actually can see Kruger here on the balcony, okay, and the crowd of people on the bottom, he's waving at them, okay, he's being called out. He met with everybody there. Everybody wanted to meet with the delegation, government ministers, members of parliament, and so on. And everybody wanted to meet Oom Paul in person. That's his nickname, okay? The president and director of the Netherlands Bank agreed to launch a stock market offering for a railroad. He was not sufficiently confident in the Transvaal economy to extend a bank loan despite the gold, okay? And on May 24th, 1884, they signed a concession for the Netherlands South African Railway Company. And they did find a new state attorney. They found William Leeds in Amsterdam. So, okay. some things accomplished. Okay, we're almost at the end of the first part of my presentation, okay? So this is another wonderful little thing here, okay? There is a place called Goshen and the Republic of Stellaland. So this was a short-lived Boer republic, the state of Goshen, okay? It was founded by the Boers who were expanding westward from the Transvaal. And of course, they opposed British advance in the region. It existed as an independent nation for a very short period, from 1882 to 1883, as the state of Goshen. Then it unified with neighboring Stellaland. It became the United States of Stellaland. Wonder where I got the idea for that name from, okay? And it existed from 1883 to 1885, okay? And this also became a focal point of conflict between the British Empire and the South African Republic. And they wanted to take over, both wanted to take over that territory. So, okay, in August of 1883, okay, they had built the United States of Stellaland. And Britain at first, the British government was not concerned about this declaration of independence of Goshen and Stellaland. They thought, okay, that they could not prevent such a proclamation of independence. However, Cecil Rhodes, our dear friend here, recognized the economic implications of an independent Boer republic. It would block the transit of goods between the Cape Colony and the British Central Africa. So he began to agitate the Cape Colony government to take forcibly control of the area. So Rhodes and his friend Frank Thompson traveled to Stellaland in September 84 to convince the locals, okay, that Cape rule, British Cape rule, would be so much better, okay, than an independent country. And this was his plan to bring the United States of Stellaland under British rule. The Stellaland residents were receptive to Rhodes, but the Goshenites were very hostile. So, okay, and I think Rhodes knew that, because what he did is he stayed at the Goshen border. He sent his friend Thompson to visit Rooigrond, the capital of Goshen, okay, to speak to the president, who was living in a tent, so very primitive, okay? And gave on Perfidious, he immediately arrested Thompson, okay? He didn't want anything to do with the Brits, okay? And then eventually he released him to go and told him to go and tell Rhodes that Goshen remained independent and that Britain needs to recognize that independence. So, okay, September 16, 1884, what happens? Paul Kruger proclaims the annexation of Goshen and Stellaland in the interest of humanity. This comes in response to Rhodes' action. So, as I said, both sides, the British side and the Boer side, wanted to have control over that area. On October 3rd, 1884, okay, the Transvaal's Director of Education, Stefanius du Toit, the same guy that went to London with Kruger, went to Rooigrond, made a fiery speech, renamed the town Heliopolis, and raised the Transvaal flag. The British told Kruger that annexation was unacceptable. No way, not going to happen, okay? And in December 84, a 4,000 strong Bechuanaland Expeditionary Force, led by General Charles Warren, okay? They were sent from England. Imagine this. They sent 4,000 people from England, soldiers from England, to stop the Boers and force Goshen and Stellaland to capitulate. Moran was met with no resistance, and Goshen was subsequently incorporated into British Bechuanaland. And in October, the colony was abolished and incorporated into the Cape Colony. And then, okay, the very next major event that determined many things, okay, was the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885, okay, that determined so much for Africa. So, okay, some of my bibliography. This is the end, okay, of my first part. And as you can see, I will start my second part with the Berlin Conference.
Thank you, Magdalena. That was excellent. I'm loving this. This is really good, and I'm really happy. I'm really looking forward. You've set the stage now for some serious drama. I know on Sunday.
It is drama.
So
it is drama. Lots of drama in this whole thing. Yes. Okay. And lots of people involved. Lots of people that we know. Okay. That are common name. Okay. And just throwing out Winston Churchill was there. You know, you had Arthur Conan Doyle was there. I mean, they were. Anyway, I'm not gonna take the talk about it now. But anyway.
I have a question on behalf of Lynette Ackerman, who can't pose her question live, but she asked about the assassinated Mr. Verwoerd, Hendrik Verwoerd, I can't pronounce these names, who was a prime minister of South Africa, killed by a guy, Dr. Solly Jacobson, who made it to London, got sanctuary, and she's making the point that Verwoerd was a great leader, and she wants to know if in your research did he come up, and was he as good as they say he was, as far as somebody trying to incorporate the various African tribes into positions of some form of cooperative leadership, or is that wrong?
I did see her name popping up. I did not see much about him. And since my focus was more towards the Second Boer War, I kind of left it on the side. So I'm sorry,
Okay.
I cannot say anything about it.
Totally okay. All right, Jerry.
Yes, I just have one question. When you were saying that Cecil Rhodes was against independence of Goshen because it would block the British railroad, is that the same reason why the British were against the independence of Republic of South Africa, Transvaal, because that would kind of block the British? Well, Cecil Rhodes wants that railroad from Cape Colony all the way up to Cairo. And it seems to me Transvaal is kind of in the way there. Is that why, do you think one of the reasons the British were so opposed to the independence of the Transvaal?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that was one of the reasons. They did agree with Cecil Rhodes that we want to expand the empire. Gladstone's government wanted to expand the empire. And they were, you know, this idea of the railroads. I mean, people admired this idea of roads, that they wanted to have a railroad from Egypt all the way to South Africa, okay? And also, so that was one reason, but also think about the immense wealth from the Kimberley diamond mines and the gold fields of South Africa. They were located in the Transvaal. I mean, the gold was located in the Transvaal. And the diamonds were located, okay, I hope I'm correct on this. They were right on the border of the Orange Free State, okay, and Goshen and Stellaland, somewhere in that area there. So obviously that was a big interest for them to have that. I hope I'm right, but I think so.
Yeah, the gold and the diamonds are more important. Okay,
And
thank
the
you.
expansion of the empire. I mean, they were imperialists. They wanted to have it all.
Yeah, I really appreciated that you brought in Ruskin, and I didn't realize that Rhodes had carried that handwritten transcript of Ruskin's imperial speech. But yeah, it's really clear that, especially in revisiting Cynthia's book on the international roots of fascism, that fascism is really the direct consequence not of nationalism as we've been told, but rather of socialist imperialism of the Fabian variety. That all of these roundtablers were all devoted believers in that idea of social imperialism, which just means, yeah, you need local fascist controllers to manage some sort of a top-down system in localized regions. And the fact that you have these Fabians, nominally socialists, but also Rhodes scholars and Rhodes controllers, all like Milner, all working together. It's a wonder, where does this all come from? But then to get at Ruskin is really important. Really appreciated that a lot. Quan has a question. Quan.
I don't. Oh,
Whoops.
sorry for the technical incident. I don't have a question. I just want to have two comments. Okay, maybe I would have a question later on. First, I want to come back to what Matt just said. I have an expression for that, and because the origin of what I would call the theoretical framework for domination is very old, but it has a new incarnation that I call the fascist imperialist liberal school. And that fascist imperialist liberal school is precisely using a makeup, a little bit like in the dialogue, The Gorgias by Plato, a makeup of liberal speech, but with a framework of fascist control and of imperialist framework. Fascist control at home and imperialist framework abroad, and with a liberal speech at home and abroad. And I would say that what would be exactly in the time framework that Magdalena was speaking about was precisely the imperial conferences, if you know about that, between 1887 and 1937, which was the ancestor of the Commonwealth meetings. And you made many times a comment, Magdalena, that it reminds a little bit of Canada. Well, it's not a surprise, as you know, okay, because Canada is a creation of those imperial conferences that would morph later on with a more liberal speech as the meetings of the Commonwealth. So the imperial word disappeared. That's my first comment. And the second comment is about, I have also problems to pronounce that kind of name, Verwoerd, who was assassinated in 1966. I don't think that the guy can be perceived as good in any way. He was the architect of the apartheid system from a theoretical standpoint. So I don't know the detail why someone hated him so much as to kill him in 1966. And maybe he killed him for the wrong reason. And anyway, killing someone is always for the wrong reason. But certainly not because he was a benefactor of mankind, since he was the inventor on the theoretical framework of the apartheid system.
No, that's interesting.
Actually, I want to say, I think all the events that lead up to the First Boer War, the Second Boer War, okay, and afterwards, okay, things like the pass laws that they established, were leading to the apartheid systems. So
yeah, absolutely.
there is no, I mean, it's, yeah, these are all consequences of being able to establish the apartheid system afterwards.
Mhm.
Yeah, did I say that right? Yeah, I think.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you would notice that in the major colonies of the British Empire, only in South Africa did they feel the need to invent a system so systematic, okay? Because in Canada, there were enough people of European ancestry that they did not feel the need to do it. In South Africa, it was truly a melting pot of Indian, of Chinese, and of Black people, the original inhabitants of the land, even if the Khoi and the San have been almost exterminated by the concentration camps at the end of the 19th century, but still. And it's special because it was a land which enough diversity precisely. So the imperialists felt the need to have a more repressive system that would be encoded within the law.
There's actually also another thing that really raised my hackles, so to speak, is this whole idea that they would say 1834, oh, we abolished slavery, okay? What a bunch of baloney. Do you call it abolishing slavery when you buy up the slaves from somebody else?
Yeah.
And Jerry came across an article just recently, where he, maybe you can talk about this for a second, Jerry, where the debt from buying up the slaves that the English government occurred had just recently been paid off. Right, Jerry? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, the loans that the British government had to take out to purchase the slaves, they finally paid that loan off, I think, maybe 5-10 years ago. So there was a big article about this in one of the newspapers. But yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I find it, because in the United States, they abolished slavery. There was no talk about reimbursing slaveholders for their slaves. None whatsoever. Okay, that's not abolishing slavery. What you do, you're just changing owners. That's
Yeah.
what the Brits did, right? They just changed owners. Now the owners is the government, the British government.
Or even better, you change the terminology, okay? Because at the core of what I call the fascist imperialist liberal school, the mythological dimension is very important, okay? How you would frame the narrative and the meta-narrative that it would suit the mind of the next generation.
Yeah.
And that is very important because that is precisely the imagination and the power of a projection of the kakistocracy.
Wait.
Did they,
Well, we were
did
going
they
in. Yeah,
put
okay,
this
all right. I'll let you jump in, Nathan. But
so-
usually put up your hand or put your name on, Nathan, in the future. But jump in now for if you want. Go ask your question.
Okay, types around. Did they ship them to other British colonies, or did they stay in South Africa just with this quasi-strange determination of freed slave owned by British Empire?
No, they did not. If I understood this question correctly, you're asking if the former slaves left South Africa to go to other places?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the question? No.
I mean, did the British did they ship? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, Nathan, your internet is really, you got a bad
Cutting.
connection. We can't hear you very well. It's cutting a lot. Yeah.
So what
I don't know if you want to try to speak to that a bit, but
So what they had done is, so they supposedly abolished slavery, okay? What they did is they said, oh, but we can't just let you go free now because you don't know how to behave. So we're going to have apprenticeship laws. You're going to learn to become a free citizen without vote, of course. Okay. And for the next 4 years, you're gonna train you to become a free citizen, okay, without vote. Okay. And so for 4 years after 1834, people were still being treated and worked as slaves, so to speak, except, of course, the terminology has now changed, as Kwan said, okay? The terminology has now changed because now they're apprentices. And they have to pass laws still. You still can't move from one place to another. You still have to have a letter of permission to move in and out of the city or from a workplace to another workplace or within the mines.
Maureen had a question from earlier on Ruskin. Maureen, did you, or I guess comments, did you want to share those?
Yeah, I was going to put something out there and maybe somebody can comment on it. Has anybody read any of Ruskin's artwork on, has anybody read The Stones of Venice?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so there you have his love for medieval architecture and art, and his deploring, well, he hated mannerism, Rococo, and even the English school, Joshua Reynolds, English Academy. And he was instrumental in the arts and crafts movement, William Morris's arts and crafts movement, which was non-industrial. He hated industrialism. And he was instrumental in the pre-Raphaelite movement. So on top of that, if you look at something like the quote unquote round table, that would have been an analogy he would have been, I could see, putting out there because he loved Arthurian stuff, and certainly the pre-Raphaelites did. So here you have this, and then he had his religious, theories as well. So you can see the whole thing of the revival of the Anglo-Saxon people. You can see how that would have come out of this Arthurian romance and out of the pre-Raphaelite movement. But if you look at it just from the art historical context and his writing context and his artworks, I mean, he's a wonderful watercolorist. So if you look at it from that perspective, I mean, solely, he looks to me a lot closer to C.S. Lewis and the love for medieval art, architecture, and religion than he does Fabian. So I don't know how, I don't know how much of what he was because I don't know Ruskin's politics, but I don't know how much was taken out of this sort of new mythos that he was developing. Anglo-Saxon mythos was borrowed from a kind of idea he had. I mean, he was a kind of unusual guy, and how it was extrapolated and used for political reasons that were not necessarily his own. I don't know, but as an art historical personality, he certainly does not look imperialistic at all.
Even after hearing the speech that he gave at Oxford as a keynote address,
well, again,
Magdalena read out. I mean, it seemed pretty imperial and explicit, right?
See, this is what I would wonder, Matthew.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say that people don't have these sort of racial imperatives, but what I, from that snippet, and I would have to listen to I would have to read the whole thing. But what looked to me like, it's a bit like the Nazis with their ultra sort of Nordic orientation of the Übermensch, that is this particular type of racial prototype. So Ruskin seems to have developed his own kind of Anglo-Saxon racial prototype that then was very convenient because you always have to have a symbolic image of what you're doing, right? It's easier to identify with an image and with a particular philosophy that's rooted in something that goes that's rooted in your quote unquote ancient history. So I don't know whether Ruskin developed as a phenomenon and then he was a convenient phenomenon to be used for a political agenda. That's what I'm saying. Do I think that there's necessarily anything great about having this, particular mythos about one's specific culture? I mean, that's another discussion, but that's what it looks like more to me. But I don't know, because I don't know how deeply he was involved in the political aspect and ramifications of what his particular mythos was. I don't know that portion.
Okay.
I only know his art historical aspects.
Okay, so let's open up for first Magdalena response, and I think Quan has a thought in response to that as well. Magdalena, do you have a response or a thought you wanted to share in return? Or
I did not go in depth in studying Ruskin. Okay, I do know that because of him teaching at Oxford, there were a number of very what should I say? Okay, the people coming out of there, out of Oxford University, who had a very particular mindset, which was very imperial minded mindset, and that must come from somewhere. And as Carol quickly pointed out, it came from Ruskin. Now, okay. As I said, I have not studied Ruskin in depth. However, okay, I can see that he will be a wonderful watercolorist. I can see that.
Oh, he's beautiful. His watercolor is beautiful. I mean, he had a real sense of what was beautiful and what was well crafted. So, so I don't know how you get into craftsmanship that's done by small collectives of people, and then have this aggressive imperialist aspect, unless you are conveniently used. I mean, he's a wealthy man in and of that himself, came from a well-to-do family. Unless you were used, and of course it would fit in with your ego if you wanted to have a legacy for a particular aesthetic point of view, right? If you align with people of political power, then your legacy is more likely to last longer. I think Ruskin had a healthy ego. So, I mean, I don't know. It's just interesting to ponder. So maybe Quan has something to say about that. Maybe he can put two and two together here.
I hope my answer will not be too convoluted, okay? Because I would like to come back to a theoretical answer, because let's not forget that the domain of beauty, the domain of the nine muses, at the core of that domain is the inner sense of justice, okay? That inner sense of justice is under the edges of the muse called Clio, the muse of universal history. But except for Clio, you have 8 other muses on different things, which are very beautiful, of course. And why do I begin by that strange answer? What I mean is that someone can be outstanding in arts, literature, and philosophy even, and it doesn't mean that that person has an inner sense of justice, because that inner sense of justice is truly at the core of the 9 muses. And I would say that it's the last quality within the domain of the timeless form of beauty that is developed. So I'm not shocked that John Ruskin, that I know a little bit of his work about arts and beauty, and I agree with Maureen. Okay, he can be quite impressive, and he's capable to create the mythology for the Anglo-speaking world in the 19th century, since he died in 1900. He was born, I think, in 1819, and he died in 1900. So he lived most of his life in the 19th century. And the 19th century was the triumph of Europe and the triumph of the United Kingdom. So would it be a so extraordinary surprise to see someone capable to be in the domain of the nine muses, but not having completely developed the core quality of the domain of the nine muses, meaning the inner sense of justice, saying something favoring the expansion of the Anglo-Saxon race? Not necessarily. Okay, it only means that human beings are very complex people, and having an inner sense of justice is probably something that is very difficult, and it can be perfectly compatible with someone capable of beauty in the other domain. Okay, the inner sense of justice is the highest form of beauty, but you have other forms of beauty in the arts, in literature, in philosophy, that can be expressed and that can be used as the mythological framework for an imperialist endeavor. And once again, I don't want to be a pain in the ass, but for me, imperial and imperialist are not the same. Imperialists are the 6E: expansion, extraction, expropriation, evangelization, extermination, and one that I forget that will come back. But anyway, it's not a good thing. And imperial is from empire, and you don't have to have imperialist attitude with an empire. And does it mean that the people wanting empire in the true sense of the word, but would not be necessarily be capable to create it without imperialist proclivities? Well, the human history till now rather answer yes to that question, that it's very difficult to have a true empire, and most of the time it wouldn't degenerate into imperialist behavior, as Magdalena showed us very clearly tonight. I stop here.
Juan, that's an excellent answer, because I think in part what you're saying is that what you're dealing with here, not unusual, would be a form of compartmentalization.
Yes, yes, and going to the true core of the timeless form of beauty, meaning the inner sense of justice, is probably the most difficult of all, because beauty has always been used by imperialist endeavor or imperial endeavor, because there are many possible definitions for human being. But one of the core definitions that I love is that a human being is someone completely mesmerized by beauty. Okay, so beauty has always been used for political domination, but when you go through the complete path of beauty, you should reach to the inner sense of justice, but that is not easy.
Very, very well put. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Quan.
My pleasure.
Caprice, did you still have a question?
Yes, it might seem a bit simple and obvious to people, but when we were speaking of how the British government maybe just paid back the loan they had for the slaves they bought, it occurred to me, like, if you say that, does that mean that you know who loaned the money to the British government? I mean, I could guess.
Jerry?
I can't remember, but yes, it was some of the big banking houses in England at the time.
That is the world. The
Okay.
Paul, I noticed that you've been writing a lot. I didn't read your thoughts out, or if that's a question. Did
Look,
you have a question, or?
Not a question. It's just, some simple comments, and they are relatively simple. I mean, the whole narrative of this Anglo superiority, which fed into, Cecil Rhodes and the whole round table thing, seems to me to be based on such a simplistic notion. My comment was, that not just in Africa, but in other parts of the world, the reason that colonial nations were able to do what they did was simply the superiority of their military technology. Nothing to do with superiority of character or, morals or anything like that. It was, much, much, much more mundane. And there's been, endless literature written on this, not just in relation to Africa, but I saw the movie Zulu, Michael Caine's first movie. It was a very famous battle at Rorke's Drift, where about 100 British soldiers managed to hold off a force of, in excess of 5,000 Zulus. They were lucky because they were in a physical location that enabled them to do it, and they had a shitload of bullets. And that's basically what happened. But the movie actually started, of course, with the massacre of a British troop out in the open. When the Zulus were able to fight them out in the open, sure, they had massive losses too, because they're fighting with short spears and, animal hide shields and everything like that. But they managed to, wipe out I forget what the numbers were, but quite a large contingent of British soldiers, which kind of juxtaposes, the position in the movie. It's quite an interesting movie from that point of view. And I think it still holds the record as the battle where the most number of Victoria Crosses were awarded. Certain amount of bravery and whatever, if you admire that sort of stuff. But this whole Ruskin thing, and I'm sure he's not the only one, but this idea that fed into the later 19th century, early 20th century movements that, you've spoken about many times, Matthew, and we're all well aware of this superiority of a particular group simply because they've managed to economically subjugate and exploit an area of the world and to try and transform it into what they think is, best for humanity, not just for themselves, no recognition that what they're doing is merely economic exploitation of the worst kind, slavery, etc., etc. But transformed into this narrative of we're doing the world a favor. Nothing could be better than us ruling the world. It's an attitude that I've come across many times, not necessarily in a lot of people, but some people, mainly through study and everything like that, that I fail to understand it. From my position, I've never been a member of the aristocracy or the wealthy class or anything like that. So I've never been trained in any of this. But from somebody who's looking at it from the bottom, if you like, I struggle to understand it. It hurts my soul.
Mine too. Juan, did you have a thought on
actually
that?
I want to say something quickly before.
Oh yeah, no, Magdalena, of course,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So Paul, you're absolutely right. I mean, in the end, and we will see that during the World War II. I'm sorry,
World War I.
the second Boer War, where the Brits threw everything at this. Okay, at one point there was like almost 500,000 soldiers, British soldiers from all the different colonies and so forth in South Africa. Yes, you're right. Okay. Might make might, right? Yeah. That's where it comes from. But also the other thing I want to show in this is the different ways, all the different machinations, I think would the word be, that were used to subdue a nation, to subdue a whole country, right? And it's not just military might. That was yes. In the end, they recognized they had to throw the kitchen and the sink and everything at this problem, their problem, but before they tried all kinds of other stuff, okay, like the pass laws and so forth, okay?
Mm.
So yes, okay, that's what I wanted to say. Okay.
Mm. Mm.
Cool.
And
Thank you.
Magdalena, I would
And
say sorry.
yep, go ahead,
No,
Paul.
look, just a brief one. I mean, in last week's lecture, when Martin was there was some mention of this through the Boer War, and I referenced another movie, which is, dare I say it, some of my earlier influences, an Australian movie called Breaker Morant. He was an Australian who was, tried and sentenced to death in the Boer War, I think for killing maybe some Boer settlers or something like that. Now, compared to what I'm sure, we're going to hear about next week, the establishment of concentration camps for the first time, what Breaker Morant did was so damned inconsequential. But it was held up by the British as being, we were taught anyway, that Breaker Morant was a very, very bad person. Now, in the movie, they kind of touched on it, but they didn't go anywhere near as far as, we're going at the moment, everything like that. But it was just another one of those cultural moments where, as a young person, relatively young person, watching that movie, it again reinforced this attitude that I just expressed. I don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
It hurts my soul. It's as simple as that. I just don't understand how cruel these people can be.
Yep.
Juan, did you have a response to
Yeah.
that or a thought? Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to. I'm happy that all those people talked before me because it's a kind of collective answer to all the comments. Because I think that it's much, much more difficult to appreciate the being in someone rather than the result or the products of his doing. And I want to stress the fact that it is thanks to the Industrial Revolution at the end of the 18th century and the 19th century that Great Britain reached to her paramount position during the 19th century and the 20th century, plus what we would call very simply the Anglosphere, okay? It was obvious that their capacity to do gave them an edge over the rest of the world. And I think that there is nothing, how can I say it? Nothing wrong in the capacity to do and to perform. Once again, I'm obsessed with the epistemological journey. The question is not to perform or to do, but to go deeper into being. And because if we go deeper into being, we will keep our capacity to perform and to do that we should not relinquish, because it's not a question to go back to caves now, but with that those two of powers, but wielded by people having a high soul or a deeper epistemological development, it would be much better. And I would say a second part to my answer, that is, there is also a duty or an endeavor to push back, okay? The people who have been victimized, in inverted comma, I hate so much that word, the victimization of victims, because it's the best way to be crushed as slaves. Those people who perceive that they have been victimized have the endeavor or the duty to push back, okay, to create for themselves the tools of power. If they have superior souls, they should be capable to learn the tools of power to push back. And I think that justice is on both sides. And I want to stop here.
I know that Jerry had written that he had a thought. Did you still want to share that, or on the?
Yeah, I guess I could. It's something I was thinking about when Maureen was talking about Ruskin and his art, because it's the Ruskin connection is the art where he studied in Venice, and the whole idea of pre-Raphaelite brotherhood, pre-Raphaelite, that means before the Renaissance, right? That you reject the Renaissance. And I just remember one time Madeline and I, when we were in Switzerland, we got to sneak away to Florence for a couple of days and see the art galleries there. And I just fell in love with all the Renaissance paintings. But there was one painting that I was looking at, and I couldn't decide if I loved this painting or if I hated it. And I keep going back to it all the time, trying to figure it out. It was this Venetian painter named Bronzino. And while technically it was flawless, it was the perspective and everything, it was perfect. But when you looked at the person's face and their eyes, the thing that got you is there was nothing there. There was no soul in that person. It like it reminded you of the Grand Inquisitor. And it's this whole Venetian art that was an attack on the Renaissance that when Ruskin became part of too. It's I haven't read Ruskin in so long, I forget what he wrote, but I just wanted to bring that up because it's the essence of it is there's no soul. Technically it's good, but there's nothing there. And I think that's
yeah, I mean, I'm particularly fond of Bronzino, technically.
technically, yes.
Right, yeah, there isn't,
But
I mean,
there's no soul.
well, I think you're he was gifted, but you're also, you're painting for money, right?
Mhm.
And excuse me, I won't, let me turn that off. You're paying for money. So if you look at a lot of his pictures of the wealthy people of the time, you look at their faces, there's a certain kind of similarity in all the faces. It's like having a script for how to paint putti, and angels and stuff, and they all look exactly the same. So, but there were other Venetian artists. Cremini is an interesting person to look at. So there were some that were extraordinary. Even I think Tintoretto did the Feast at Canaan and Marriage at Canaan. That's quite an interesting alchemical painting. But so, I mean, there were some interesting things, but you're right about Bronzino. I mean, the detail is just extraordinary. It's beautiful. It's eye-capturing, but right, it seems very soulless. And that was a whole school of painting, I think. But I call that painting for money.
Unless he was actually just a good painter and he was correctly painting the portrait of these nobility because they didn't have a soul.
Well, well, maybe, but they all look the same. It's sort of like the eyes are the same. There was a way, and it could be the way that they perceive to be beauty. And so you took the individual face and you put a format in front of it, and you had to see the person through the format. But sometimes the format takes over the individuality of the person. I don't know.
I noticed that there were a couple of people who put their hands up but took them down again. So I'll give people one last chance. Did Zach or Susie, did you guys want to get a thought or a question off your chest, or were you pretty satisfied by the conversation thus far?
I'd like to try to say, if I could regather my thoughts, Quan's explanation of the nine muses, and then the central core of that and the highest form of beauty is justice. I want to study more of that out, Quan, if you've got any leads for me. But we all need to be learning that and reaching for that. That's part of what, I hope I don't say this in the wrong way, but that's what made Ruskin so dangerous. What I've learned about him, and I feel like I am in kindergarten compared to all of you, but Magdalena mentioned the machinations that enabled them to do what they did. Ruskin, in his position at, I think it was Oxford, was highly successful in shaping the minds of his students to further this system of empire. And what Paul said about when you look at what they did, how it hurts your soul, the way they dominated, enslaved, and out killed so many, and they're still doing it today. I'm not sure I know how to say more than that. It just is painful. But thank you very much, Magdalena, for sharing with us all of your research. And I can't wait to listen to the next one, even though it is quite painful. These are things that we all need to look deeply into and understand. And then that last thing that Quan said about being instead of doing. The more we grow in our being, our doing can be refined more and more to be in alignment with true beauty and true justice.
Thanks, Susan. I just want to say that it is hurting, okay? But the reason we have to look at it is because we need to learn from it, and we need to recognize these machinations when they occur again now. That's why I want to share this.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of substance here, material to work with for any type of aspiring tragedian and playwright that might be out there looking for material to be inspired by for modern classical tragedies. I think the story you've started to create here, or the stage you've begun to set, is full of it, where there's people who are obviously we're rooting for the underdogs, we're rooting for the Boer Wars in the story so far, but at the same time.
But at the same
got
time,
all kinds of systemic problems.
Yes.
There's all sorts of things that are polluting their ability to form judgments and carry out the type of coordinated action that would be needed if you were going to do battle with this type of globally extended evil. You can't be as compromised in with yourself as so many of these Boer fighters were, or leaders were. But still, that's the topic of some really great tragedy.
Yep.
Would love to see
flaws,
somebody
right?
tackle
The flaws on both sides, because this is the whole thing. You have the sympathy. You have the sympathy for the Boers, but wait a second, these guys were not good either.
Yeah.
But you're going like, okay,
Yeah.
what now? You know, yeah. Anyway,
I'm sorry, but my sympathy's with the natives.
yes,
Sure.
Yeah.
yes,
Sure.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
but
Paul.
may I interrupt?
Yes,
Sure.
please.
I am absolutely delighted, Paul, that your sympathies is for the natives. But I want to be a pain in the ass once again. I know that there was a big difference in technology between the British and the natives, that's for sure. Okay, I'm not blind to that factor. But at the same time, the natives had the duty, transgenerationally speaking, to push back. Okay, that's the piece of justice on their side.
And they tried. You could say the
Yes.
same thing about the natives in America and North America and as well. They tried.
Well, I promote the fact that they keep on trying. Okay, because it's part of their honor as a human being. And
yes, we all try.
And pushing back doesn't necessarily mean to conquer Canada. Okay, pushing back means to be better, to be more endowed with the tools of power, first in the mind and after outside the mind.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, definitely the importance of appreciating the sophistication and nature of what allows evil to come into being in the first place, where it's located inside of us as a potential, and then also to be able to see its machinations working subtly throughout history. That ability to take the time to study it is so important, because so many good naive people, because they didn't take the time to properly investigate these things, they go straight into some form of action mode, and undo themselves. They walk into the first trap that they find. They walk right into it. And the good comes undone so frequently by people not studying the topography that they're operating in, epistemological and as well as intellectual and spiritual. So yeah, super important.
And for Susie, before sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, you go. It's okay.
Okay, so for Susie, before I forget, if you want to know more about the nine muses, there's a Greek professor speaking English on YouTube named Nikos Xantoulis. Okay, Nikos is his given name, Nikos. Xantoulis, his family name, Xantoulis. And the other thing that I want to answer you before I forget, I think that at the beginning of the presentation, you asked what is the origin of the word Boer. It's a Dutch
she answered that.
Okay. Okay. She answered for that. Okay. So it's a Dutch word meaning farmer. Yeah.
All right.
But I wanted to say in response to what
Yep.
Magdalena said last, and I guess it relates to what Paul was saying, I am highly encouraged that I think a great portion of humanity is growing in that empathy for others. Just like in my adult life, I had seen, for the most part, a lot of us really were growing out of older racist attitudes until a leader came along in the States and revived them all. So I hope we all continue our epistemological growth.
Mm-hmm.
One good aspect of that one, Susan, is the recent UN vote, where there was a call for continued ceasefire in Gaza. And I forget exactly what the numbers were, but it was over 100 countries voted in favor of that, and a mere 10 voted against, two of which were the US and Israel, of course. But it would seem that, and again, I'm being simplistic, when it touches your soul or your heart, that's for you, Nathan. I agree with you. The soul can't be hurt, but that's the word that I used when I first made mention of it. It seems to me that there are always going to be some points where the majority of human beings cannot go beyond. Meaning that the horror that's happening in Gaza is too much for the majority of human beings on the planet, no matter what the political alignments of these countries may have been the day before they took, or the day before October the 7th. It seems now that there is a big push in what I would call the right direction, Susan.
But we also still have a lot of work to do along the lines of what much of Matt has been doing recently, to still unravel the narratives so that we can truly get to the roots of who's lighting the fires and take away their ammunition.
Yep.
So thank you, Matthew. You're doing some good work these days.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Susie. All right, guys. So I noticed that Zachary pulled his hand down again. It was up and down and up and down. Now I guess it's down. Zach, did you have, this is your last chance? Did you want to ask the question?
No.
Everyone, are you satisfied?
No, everyone has sort of, Quan Lee, thank you. Magdalena, thank you. Everyone has sort of filled in. I mean, of course, Ruskin is, that's a deep story. And also I think we should look at what he really meant when he said the Anglo-Saxon race. There's a piece of reading I will try and pull back. I'll get them to pull back and send to me. Kind of looking at that term and its definition. But as long as you start going around Oxford, Tavistock, even when you were speaking about the money borrowed, there's a specific sect, the nobility sect, that basically is about that. And you'll find that the British had to throw everything at South Africa, the kitchen sink and all, because pretty much it's not just they borrowed the money, It was for a specific purpose. They didn't go in there just to like have a bit of land. It had something in there they wanted. Well, not they, their owners wanted, or those who they owed wanted. Do you understand? So that's kind of my interpretation of the whole thing. And Quant, that was a beautiful piece of poetry speaking about justice. I don't know where you picked that up from, but I will try to pick it up when Matthew posts the video. So don't worry about it, Matthew. I'm okay.
Okay. All right, great.
Yeah, thanks.
No, thank you for contributing those thoughts, Zach. And yeah, Quan, did you
Well,
did you have a
no, I
thought?
just want to answer that piece is from Plato as passed through my mind.
Cool.
A good filter,
All
that
right,
one.
guys.
Yeah, it is. It is beautiful.
So it's yeah, we have to wrap it up. Unfortunately, it's super late. I got a really, really early morning. It's going to be excruciating. But Magdalena, thank you so immensely much. Really, really appreciate getting this actually recorded. This is the class I've been waiting for on this topic for a very long time. So really looking forward to next week. Everybody, thank you very much for coming this Wednesday. Yeah, and we'll hopefully see everybody come back on Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, and wherever else you are, you can calculate that accordingly.
Ciao.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.